Welcome to Sisters in Sobriety. Today we're joined by Danielle McGeough, a professor, coach, and host of the Plan Goal Plan podcast. Danielle helps people reconnect with themselves after major life shifts. But what makes her approach especially compelling is that she focuses on something deeper, helping people rediscover who they are underneath the goals, the roles, and the expectations. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. So, for listeners who may not know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how it led you to the work you're doing today?
Yeah, I'm a mom, a professor, and a ritual nerd. And, for me, I got into all of this in part because I was following my curiosities, and in part because I lost myself a bit. So, when I was probably 20, I decided I wanted to be a professor. And I was not the smart kid, y'all. I was the weird kid growing up. All of my report cards describe me as unique. And so when I decided I wanted to be a professor, and that entails going to school for a very flippin' long time, I told myself the only way I was going to keep up with all these smarty pants that I was going to school with was to work twice as hard as everyone else. And so I developed all the habits, like work habits, life habits, study habits. You have a habit, I'm going to stack it. And honestly, it worked, right? I got the PhD, I ended up getting my dream job, and I published articles and wrote books, and I earned tenure. And when I got there, 20 years later, I felt incredibly flat, overwhelmed. I know now that I was both burnout and demoralized, and I just had no idea what I wanted to do next. And when I tried to think about it, I'd realized that in the process of checking off all the boxes, check, 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 that I'd really also just disconnected from myself. And so that's when I knew I needed to explore other ways of holding on to my ambition and my drive and my curiosities. But how do I do that without losing myself? How do I do that in a way that actually makes me more me?
So, what was there like a moment that made you realize that you had to make a shift?
I would say that it was a little quieter than one huge moment, but a lot of really crappy ones. So I knew that I was snapping at my husband. I was really anxious. I was ruminating all of the time. I was trying to really control everything because it felt really out of control. I was also a new mom around the time that I had earned tenure. So I was also trying to figure out, how do I step into this new role? And I was tired and sleep deprived, and my back was slipping out of place, and I had mastitis 9 times in 9 months. And so there were just a lot of physical, and I would say also mental things that were happening at the same time that I was trying to make some really big decisions about, where do I want my career to go after this? And it was a lot, and I do remember having more than one moment, but quite a few moments where I was like, this is not my best self. This is not me showing up the way that I want to show up. And then actually I had a student. This was kind of a huge aha moment. There's two that actually came from my students. Students are amazing. And one was, a student was talking about decorative planning. So basically she was putting stickers in her planner. And her therapist had recommended that she do this because she was avoiding doing any sort of time management work. She would avoid it because she didn't like it. And so she loved to doodle, she loved to craft. And her therapist was like, hey, this is a way to kind of get you to do this practice, but pair it with something that you like. And I was getting really into time management, in part because I was just trying to control everything. And so I was like, you know what? Maybe I should get stickers out.
I'm thinking about getting stickers right now. I'm like about to go on Amazon.
Stickers are so much fun, and I loved it because, like, you don't have to be that artistically talented to use stickers and make things look cute. And so I started just playing around with putting stickers in my planner as I would do my planning ritual, and it shifted something for me because it would slow me down. It would give me time to really reflect as I was thinking about what I was going to schedule that week. Well, does this light me up? What's my energy like when I do this? You know, is this something I want more of or less of in my life? And how do I want to be when I move my kids through getting ready in the morning? How do I want to communicate with my husband? And so there's something about the process that just slowed me down. And then the second thing was I had a student give a presentation where she started and she said, burnout and demoralization aren't the same thing. And I was like, tell me more.
Yeah.
And she explained that burnout is when you think, I can't keep going like this. I'm exhausted. I've been going, going, going. Demoralization's a little bit different. It's that you still might have the passion, you still might have the drive, but you feel like something, the system, the structure of things, something's blocking you from being able to do what you want to do in the way that you want to do it. So it feels like out of alignment with your own integrity. And I realized, I was like, oh, I'm an overachiever. I have burnout and demoralization. I had both been working an intense amount of hours, really all of my adult life, trying to prove myself. But I also, somewhere along the way, had also gotten demoralized where, I wanted to be able to make a really big impact with my teaching and my research. And it was, it was having an effect, but not at the scale or the scope or the depth that I thought that it could. And I felt like a lot of the systems that I was operating within were making it really hard for me to do that in a way that I wanted to. So my agency felt really limited.
You're demoralized.
I was
And
demoralized.
so, how did that demoralization change your relationship essentially with your goals and ambition that you had sort of been striving for so long?
I felt a lot of, oh my gosh, what am I doing this for anymore? Like, is it even worth it? Am I in the right spot? Did I just waste my entire adulthood chasing something
Mhm.
that really wasn't what I thought it was going to be? Um, I kind of felt like a dupe, like a dope. Like I felt bamboozled maybe. And a lot of like, so it was weird because I felt bitter and resentful at the same time that I felt really numb. In part because, like, if I let myself really feel all of that bitterness and resentfulness, it was too much to hold. And so what would happen is I'd get these like slivers of feeling like that, and then I would immediately want to dissociate, immediately disconnect. Like, let's numb out somehow.
Yeah. What were the ways you were doing that?
Numbing out.
Yeah.
So for me, a lot of my numbing out was just completely disconnecting a lot of times. So it would be kind of to avoid certain things, and I've never been avoidant. I tend to be over functioning. And it would be avoiding having conversations or relationships with people I normally would
Mhm.
at work. It would be avoiding tasks that I knew that needed to get done. Some of it was I read a lot of novels and I would get really lost in that, or I watched a lot of, I would binge Netflix. I actually have a recollection of watching a ton of Netflix series while I was in grad school. This is like back in the day when Netflix still like mailed you
Yes.
yes, DVDs. And I was binge watching stuff, and I remember having a conversation with one of my peers in my graduate program and sort of saying like, "Oh, I watch all of these things so that I can just feel again." And it felt safer to feel things through these fictional characters than it felt to feel things that were actually my feelings. So it's like, oh, well, I can take on the feelings of, I don't know, Jennifer Garner in Alias, right? But to take on Danielle's actual emotions felt too tender. And so, in terms of, I probably over exercised, did some things like that as well.
So, did you find that your identity essentially had to evolve beyond sort of your career and your role as like a wife and a mother? Is that what it took, or was it something else?
Absolutely. I think that I needed to spend a lot of time just learning who I was underneath all of the achievements and underneath all the roles too. Roles are an important part of our identity and our identity creation, but it's not all of it. And I needed to figure out what I enjoyed, and then I needed to change my relationship because right now, like, I very much identify as someone with banana pants ambition, and it's not a part of me that I'm interested in shrinking for other people.
Mhm.
At the same time, though, the ambition is more about the journey, it's about the process, the curiosities, the things that I learn about myself as I'm going about developing new skills or taking on, something that might appear as an achievement externally. So it's more about the internal growth that comes through the process of attaining the goal. And then I had to really shape my relationship to goals and to planning. So for me, goals were about, if I go after this thing, what am I going to learn about myself? Who am I going to become? And I needed to find agency again. That was a huge part because I did need to rest and shift my relationship with just the pace that I was working at. That was part of healing from burnout. But healing from demoralization really required me to infuse my actions with meaning again. A lot of rituals. I'm a huge fan of rituals as a way to infuse meaning in our lives. And just a lot of learning about myself. So, like, for me, planning became less about time management. It became a way to collect data about myself. I like to imagine if an alien came down and grabbed my calendar, like, what would they think my values were? What would they think my priorities were? And how do I use my planning practice as a way to prompt reflection and to actually go, oh, I say that this matters to me, but it's never showing up on my calendar. I wonder what's going
Mhm.
on there.
And so when you talk about ritual, how is it different from like a routine or a habit?
Yeah. So habits are designed to eventually become automatic.
Ah,
So a habit is a behavior that over time we repeat it almost into invisibility. So that it's
uh-huh.
actually really great, and I think particularly for women who carry incredible mental loads, right? Where we know what's in our pantry, we know, what we take care of a lot of people beyond ourselves. And anyone that is in that sort of a role is carrying a huge mental load. And so having habits is really helpful because what they do is they help some of those things become automatic so that we don't have to do the mental labor of that. The issue is that when you find that you're in a place where you're check, 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 what we need isn't more automatic habits, but actually something that brings us into consciousness, that invites presence and actually infuses meaning into behaviors. So, habits are really good for flossing your teeth, but aren't particularly good for connecting to yourself or other people.
And so, why are rituals so powerful when it comes to our identity?
So I think one of the biggest things about ritual is that it has the ability to shift us from one state to another. And when it does that, it connects us to ourselves and who we want to be. And so I'll give you a few examples of my process for ritual as well, and I think it will be helpful. So I teach something called a RISE ritual method, and the R stands for reflect. And basically, you just think about, well, what's the state that I'm currently in, and what's the state that I want to be in? And so one of my clients, will call her Sarah. She's an engineer, and she had a pretty intense job, and she had a toddler at the time, and she'd work all day, and then she'd come home and her toddler was throwing the biggest tantrums, like incredible tantrums.
Mm.
And when her son would throw these tantrums, she would meet him there. And one day, and she got really vulnerable sharing this with me, but she said, Danielle, I'm getting really angry when he throws these tantrums. And I really don't like that that's how I'm parenting. And I said, well, how would you like to parent? And she's like, well, I want to be a safe place for my son. She said, I want to be safe place, Sarah. And so what we did then from there is we said, okay, your current state is angry. Your desired state is safe place, Sarah. Let's create a safe place, Sarah ritual. And so we created a ritual for her that would help move her. So when her son would throw a tantrum, she would take a deep breath to center herself. She would open her arms and she would think to herself, I am safe place, Sarah. And then she would engage with her son. She would say, she would talk to her son and she would invite him to have a hug was actually something that really helped regulate him. And so she would invite him to hug her. And so the reason that ritual has such a huge impact on our identity is because it asks us to think about, well, how do I want to show up? What is the state that I want to be in? How do we name that? But then also, how do I actually embody that? And that embodiment of safe place Sarah helps her
Mm.
become the sort of mom who, the sort of mom who is calm and collected when her son throws tantrums.
Yeah. And so, was Sarah before, was she overthinking, overreacting? Like, how would you look at the state before that intentional sort of action?
I think she was very reactive, and she was angry. She was, you know, snapping at her son, saying, "Hey, stop throwing the tantrum, like stop it. You can't act like this." Things like that. And it made sense. She she was depleted, right? She was also operating from a space where she didn't have a lot of reserves. But it was escalating the situation, and then she would feel guilty and had so much shame afterwards because she's like, "Well, this isn't the sort of mom that I wanna be. I don't wanna talk to my son like that. I don't wanna, like, yell at him if he's in a moment of pain and then have him maybe be afraid of me." And so, we had to spend some time and go, "Well, how do you wanna be?"
And how did you develop your framework, and like how does it differ than sort of traditional goal setting frameworks for people who are feeling disconnected?
When it comes to ritual is actually something that I've been studying for a really long time. And so I've been studying how people used rituals more collectively. One of my biggest maybe projects around rituals was looking at a group of urban poor in the slums of Mumbai who had built their own toilets and then would have toilet festivals where they would invite basically the community as well as state officials to come and take a tour of their toilets. And this was really fascinating to me. One, because a lot of NGOs had gone into these same areas, tried to build toilets, and it didn't work. And this was a group that was doing it and was successful. They were being maintained. But also, this is a group of people, a group of urban poor that were sort of seen as, I don't know, not contributing to society. And here they were getting permission to build on land that wasn't their own, collecting all the materials that they would need to build. They learn how to build this thing, they learn how to maintain it. And they would take people through this ritual experience of a tour. And at the end, they were undeniably changed, right? They were seen
Yes.
as capable, as contributing citizens, as people who made a difference and cared about the place that they lived, and they saw themselves differently, as well as the people who came and walked through this. So I had been doing research around ritual and like looking at how people created funky, fun, creative, playful rituals that shifted how they were seen, how people were seen collectively. And so I wanted to start to think about, well, what does that look like on a personal scale? The other thing is, plan, goal, plan is named because I felt like people would jump into goal setting. So I would go to these goal setting retreats, particularly like as a woman, I would go to these goal setting retreats and they'd be like, okay, so like, what do you want? And I was like, "What do I want?" Like, I've been spending all day taking care of everybody else. I have no clue what I want, you know? And it just felt too abrupt. It felt and then I would set goals and they would be like, "This is what Pinterest or Instagram says I should be doing as, a woman in my, early 40s." And so I was setting goals that were based off of what I thought I should be doing more than goals that were actually connected to my own desires and needs and wants. And so I realized that before I would ever have women sit down and do goal setting, that they actually needed to do some planning, not only because time is such a big issue. So a lot of people are like, oh, I want to exercise, but I don't have the time. Oh, I want to write a book, but I don't have the time. Oh, I want to start a podcast, but I don't have the time. And so I was like, well, one, let's develop some skills and capacities around that. But as we do that, do that in a way that actually sees planning as us collecting data on ourselves so that we're learning about ourselves in the process. So we plan first and usually set a foundation for that. And now we have time management skills and we've connected to ourselves. Now let's set goals. Then once we've actually connected to a vision, set those goals, now let's plan again that we have the direction. And so that's plan, goal, plan.
That's amazing. Yeah, I struggle with like redefining um success. Because I was super successful in my first career. I was an orthodontist, and I sold my practice, and then having to kind of redefine like what are like the metrics of success. So is that sort of the first plan?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
the first plan would be one, how do I just start learning about myself?
Mhm.
What does light me up? What do
Yeah.
I actually care about? And a lot of that is connected to our own definitions of success, right? Um, because what you don't want to do is recreate the same problem in a new way, right? So you might go, "Oh, I was an orthodontist and I was wildly successful, but I felt hollow or
Oh,
empty."
yeah.
You don't want to just go, "Oh, I see this a lot of times with so many of the women I work with are over functioning." And so what will happen is we'll talk about, the importance of rest, but then they'll turn rest into a competition.
Yes.
Like, it becomes
Yes.
just another thing to check off, and the problem with that is you don't ever feel like, now all of a sudden resting doesn't even feel restful, it just feels like another box. This is a funny story, but this last week, we had spring break, and they had a readathon at my kid's school, and my son, so the whole goal is just to read a whole lot for a week and collect money for the school as we do it, but also the kids kind of compete. And my son realized after a few days that he was in the top 3 in the whole school. And this lit a fire under him. He was like, "I'm gonna win this thing. I'm reading nonstop." And so he'd been reading, reading, reading. We were on a little vacation. We gone like hiking. We'd gone to this like indoor adventure park. It was really fun. But anytime that we weren't doing those things, he was reading. Well, Saturday hits. School starts again on Monday. On Saturday, it's beautiful outside, y'all. I live in Iowa. It should be nasty. It was somehow like 85 degrees that day. And the neighbor kids are outside playing. He sees them outside and he starts sobbing. And
Oh,
I'm like, buddy, what's wrong? And he's like, I want to go play with the neighbors. And I was like, go play with the neighbors. And
no, you
he's like, but
can't.
I want to win readathon. And I'm like, "Okay, I love that you're going after this thing. Also, though, maybe you can play with the neighbors and win readathon." And he's like, "But what if I fall behind? And what if I don't have time?" And then he's like, he starts sobbing again, and he's like, "I don't even feel like I got spring break." And I was like, "Oh, sweet boy, welcome. Welcome to life." Right? Because I was like,
My
you
God.
chose this. He chose this for himself, but then he got so wrapped up in it
Yeah.
that he had this moment, and I was like, "Look at you can decide. We'll be proud of you no matter what. You can decide if you wanna see this through or not." Also, though, we did go on a vacation. You've seen both of your grandparents, you've hung out with your aunts, we've gone for hikes, we went to Fun Station, right? I start listing all of the things. What was wild is that he had gotten so sort of wrapped up in the goal that even though he was relaxing, he was doing some of the fun things, he didn't feel it.
Such a
I
unique experience. Like,
It's like such an I mean, I'm like, "Ooh, I've been there, buddy."
yeah. So I've noticed this too. Obviously, we talk to people all the time about self growth that sort of turn it into another goal, right? And so the same thing, turning rest or turning like wellness into another sort of like pressure filled checklist. And so that is a great example, but how do we not do that? And so people do this with sobriety too. It's like I'm gonna read all the quit lit books, and I'm gonna make all the mocktails, and I'm gonna go to all the meetings. And I have this problem too, is turning everything into this like productivity situation. So if I start like knitting, I'll be like a couple of months in and be like, maybe I could start a business. I could sell these hats at the farmer's market. And I am very consciously because it's like I can't just be unproductive. I can't just like sit there and knit a hat that looks bad that I'm gonna put on my dog or something. And so what is that? And how do we stop doing that?
First, I think it's important that we accept that we're ambitious people, and maybe that is part of who we are, and we can love that part of ourselves, and that we can be the sort of person who knits and then goes, "Well, maybe I can start a farmer's market business," right? That it's because you love mastery. You love learning a skill and getting it better at it, and the improvement, it's really flippin' satisfying, and I think that if we can just I think that it's important to go, "Maybe that's just part of me." And I'm not
Mhm.
supposed to shut off the fact that I love mastery. But I can love mastery and getting good at knitting without taking it to the farmer's market, right? So I'd be curious asking you sort of like, what are the moments that you kind of catch yourself? And can you just, can you have some systems in place that help you catch yourself before you head to the farmer's market?
Yes, I think part of it is, um, and this maybe gets back to the readathon a bit, where I don't, and I'm learning too, and this is something in sobriety, is celebrating small wins. And so I have trouble celebrating small wins sometimes. And so, like with your son, for example, like let's celebrate every time we finish a book. Like, let's, yeah, like, but it's like when you set the big goal, that is the problem. And so for me, I did write a book and I'm currently editing it. And I was interviewing someone last week and she specializes in like play and like crafting. And she
Yeah.
said, like, can you believe you wrote a book? And I'm like, I don't think about it like that. I think about like I don't have an agent yet or a publisher. And she's like, but like, do you know how many people start to write and like don't get past the first chapter? And I was like, no, I didn't. I've never, no, I never stopped to think about it. And so I think that is something I could do better is celebrating the smaller milestones. Um,
It's so interesting. I just read Jonathan Goodman has a book called Unhinged Habits, which is a cool name for a book, by
yeah.
the way. And in it, he has this kind of provocative statement that I've been circling around, which is, change is created by intensity and maintained by consistency. And what I sort of think about is, you kind of talking about, especially when somebody starts their sobriety journey, it's really, I think, normal to have this period of intensity where you're like, I'm gonna read all of the quit lit. I'm going to go to all of the, like all of these meetings, and I'm going to make all the mocktails. And I think that this is this period of intensity where we are just learning to step into the new identity. And then once we've sort of stepped into that identity, I do think that it can kind of soften a bit where we learn a consistency that maintains it, but it doesn't have to operate at the same scale of intensity when we're first making that shift. And I like to have I love all of the small wins, and I think that having rituals in place that just return us to ourselves. Oh, why do I love knitting so much? Why did I start writing this book? Oh, what is happening here? I'm so curious that, that I'm worried about all of these things that need to get done, but I haven't taken time to measure all of the ways that I've made progress, right? So I actually love, I think it's Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy have a book called The Gap and the Gain. And in it, they talk about the gain. When you're in the gain, that's where you want to be. And that's where you just are finding evidence that what you're doing is working, right? The gap is where you go, oh, I want to be here. I want to be in X place, but I'm only clear back at L or M, right? That's you with your book. You go, oh, I want to have the book done and it's not there yet. But so the gap would be to go, here, I need to get an agent, I need to do all of this stuff. The gain is going, oh, I got this chapter written and this chapter written. And I came up with the most beautiful example in this chapter. And ooh, I used like this chapter, the way that my writing is just, you know,
Yeah.
that's the gain. So you stay in the gain when you're recognizing all of those little wins. And the gap is when you see where you're sort of fixated on the distance between where you are and where you want to be.
I have a gap mindset. I
Yeah,
think.
and so this would be a good read for you because it helps sort of shift how do you get yourself so that you're in the game, but you might also create some rituals that when you can just be aware, ooh, I'm in a gap mindset. What's a ritual I can do to move me from, gappy,
Happy thinking.
gappy? Gabby Gaddy, like I'm trying to make up a fun name,
Yeah.
to, Gloria Gaines, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so what I think is super helpful is when you explained, yeah, there is this period of intensity, right? When you are starting something or you're learning and you're super curious and you're like, yeah, rapidly getting knowledge. And then it moves to consistency. Can it move to flexibility at some point? And so I find this too, like geez, I thank God I have therapy tomorrow. I have a lot of issues because I find this too. I am like this with, like, I'm like, oh, I really like to journal. And then I'll look at my journal and I haven't journaled in 4 days. And I'm like, do you like to journal? Because if you liked to journal, you would have been journaling the last 4 days. And so, yeah, is there a point where we can give ourselves a little bit of flexibility, and how do we honor that?
So, I would encourage you to rethink what consistency is. So, consistency isn't frequency. I think that a lot of times we mistake consistency and frequency, right? So the
Yeah.
Yes, yes, and that, for me, consistency is about shortening the gap between oops, and starting again. And it's not necessarily about how often, right? It's just about shortening that gap between oops and then starting again. And so if you shift that, if you pick up your journal and you're like, "Oh, I haven't journaled in 4 days. How do I stay consistent with that?" Well, that's to shorten the gap between the oops and that. So that means, like, let's journal right now.
Yeah.
Whereas I think if we get so connected, so even like with exercise, right? That's a big one, right? We might say something like, "Oh, I want to exercise 3 times a week or 4 times a week." And that's what consistency is. Well, one, I do think that having in your head, well, what is consistency? It doesn't have to mean every single day. Maybe it is just 3 times a week. But also, how do you reframe consistency so that if you look and you're like, "Oh no, I only exercised twice this week." Okay, well, how do I remain consistent? I do it as soon as I can again, because that's shortening the gap between the oops and doing it again. And so for me, consistency is built in flexibility. That consistency should be, this is a thing that I do often.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think I am so stuck on the, like, X number of times a week. And yeah, I am the same way with working out. You're right.
And I think it's so easy to get into that all or nothing mindset rather than all or something. Or I sometimes like to go, well, what if I had an ish mindset around this? Right? That like, I journal daily-ish. I
Yeah.
exercise, you know, 3-ish times a week. And it does depend on the person, right? Like I tend to work with people, and you seem a lot like this as well, right? That are a little more over functioning, over committed, over scheduled, right? Where I think some people's response can be to shut down. And like if like that fight or flight response kicks in, I'm a fighter. I'm like,
Mhm.
"Oh, I'm stressed out about this. Well, let's go. Let me over like I'm going to over deliver, over perform, and that's how I'm going to solve this." Like that's what my brain does. But like my sister's the complete opposite. She's like, "Oh, this is so overwhelming. Let's just cocoon in my bed."
Mhm.
And so, like, if you are someone that over functions and overperforms, I do think that adding that ishness
I love it.
to your definitions could like really, really help because it removes some of the pressure. And that's actually kind of what you need. Whereas, like, if you're someone that is cocooning, if you're someone like you might need slightly different techniques.
Yeah, I think though that the ish is like it really resonates with me when you say it. I'm like, yeah, I journal like 3, 4 times a week-ish.
Ish. It's so powerful. There's something about the ish that takes the pressure off. Yeah.
I use it for everything.
Yes.
I eat healthy-ish.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's so wild because I do think that we tend to live in a society where moderation is not sexy.
No, no, I
You know?
totally agree, yeah.
It's like, we 75 hard everything.
Yes, yes, it was funny, I was watching Blue Zone documentary with some friends, and you realize how much of that is about moderation, right? And so it's like, we were sitting there and we were like, "Okay, so wait, what did they say? Do you have to work out like for" and there's like, "No, you're just supposed to be active-ish and healthy-ish." And yeah, and everything in the Blue Zone about, like, longevity was about moderation.
Yeah, and it just, moderation doesn't sell gummies with 75 grams of protein.
No, that exactly, they're not drinking protein shakes, they're not lifting weights in the Blue Zone, they're not doing any of those things, they're just, like, living a healthy-ish life. Yeah, what comes back to the ish in the Blue Zone too is that that's not as stressful, right? And instead of being, like, all or nothing, the moderation really takes that pressure off.
Yes. Now, I will say for people that are on their sobriety journeys,
Yeah,
right?
speaking
There
of, yeah.
there is that is a place where like research suggests an all or nothing approach usually.
Yeah,
And that's oftentimes because you haven't been able to maintain the moderation as like an approach to alcohol, as approach to substances, right? So my mom's a substance abuse counselor. I grew up, um, she was a substance abuse counselor in a prison, and so I have talked to her about her work a
yeah.
lot. And I do know there might be some places, particularly with habit change, where it has become invisible. We repeated into invisibility that we have these bad habits that we aren't even aware of. We do them automatically, unconsciously. And we might the only way for us to break that bad habit might be an all or nothing approach. Right? It might be to sort of say, "No, we've tried moderation. That's actually not something I can do." And so we might need to approach certain breaking habit loops. We might need to break habit loops with a nothing approach.
For sure. I think, yeah, like I have an all or nothing approach to drugs and alcohol, right? Like, and
Yep.
I don't question. I don't think maybe I could moderate, but how can rituals support someone in, for example, early sobriety and habit change? So my ritual, I had a very strong ritual, habit, all of it, whatever you want to call it, around like coming home and like opening a bottle of wine and getting my glass out and pouring the wine. And so how can rituals help essentially like breaking habits, or can they?
So what I would say is when you were pouring that glass of wine, what was the state that you were seeking?
Yeah, it was I very strongly used it to transition from work to, home. It was very, very specific.
Yes. So, what I would encourage you to think about is how could you create a replacement ritual that will help you shift from work to home? That's actually one of the most common rituals I work with people on creating is like, how do you turn off busy brain and and work brain so that you can be present again at home? And people have all sorts of different approaches to this, but if you name that state, you're like, oh, I'm busy brain and I want to be relaxed, right? And that's what the wine ritual is doing for you. Well, how do we evoke our senses in a way, but it isn't the wine anymore, right? And so the rise ritual method, one, you reflect, then you intentionally plan. You think about when am I going to do it, where am I going to do it, how long. And usually I have people create maybe different you might have a 1 minute, a 5 minute, or an hour long ritual, right? Depending on what you have available. And then Also the S stands for sensory activation, right? So there's something about pulling that glass out of the cupboard, pouring something, the taste of the first sip. It's such an active process, right? So how do you create something that's going to also do that, but it has to move you to your desired state? So what I always explain is I wake up and my brain is just like firing when I wake up. So my morning ritual is all about actually putting me in a grounded, calm state because I wake up and my brain's like, like, let's get all of the things done. My husband, when he wakes up, he is groggy and foggy. So he does not like my ritual is very calming. I journal, I wear a snuggie. I'm like cozy. If he would put on a snuggie,
Fall
he
back
would
asleep.
fall back to sleep.
Yeah.
So you have to choose things that moves you to your desired state. So, and I would say if you were enjoying something that was like hand to mouth, right? How could you also create something else that maybe is hand to mouth that also relaxes you? And if you can create a ritual that does that, that's part of the reason the mocktails work. You're just replacing the wine with something else, but you still get to do all of the other parts of the ritual.
You don't think that it's too close? Some people think, "Oh, well, mocktails, it's too close to the actual habit itself." What do you think?
It could be. I think it depends on the person.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is like the most annoying answer. But I think that for some people, you might need to completely break the even like going and grabbing the glass, right? You might need to have instead, I'm gonna go grab a pen, my journal, and a snuggie. It might be I need to have other people around me, right? So figure out what some of those things are that you need because some people might need some alone time when they get off of work. And part of what's really hard is that maybe they aren't getting that and they're overstimulated. For other people, being left alone there might be more temptation in that to go grab that glass of wine. So they might do better to be surrounded by people. Oh, when I get home from work, I immediately play Taco Cat with my kid. Oh, when I get
What's
home from work,
Taco Cat?
it's a game, it's really fun, and it doesn't take very long, but, like, if you're like, "Okay, now how do I instead of walking to the cupboard, I walk to the game drawer and I'm grabbing a game." Right? I think that if you can immediately create that that immediate cue, it can be really helpful, um, or just, like, creating a pause, I think is really
Mhm.
helpful sometimes with habit loops too, so, anything that can interrupt, you going and grabbing that glass, if that's where the problem
Mm.
starts. And of course, designing our environments to support the state that we want to be in. So, like, I think just activating your senses in some sort of a way. If you're already doing something hand to mouth, it might be helpful, even if it's like, I'm going to go home and I'm going to grab some gum and I'm going to chew on it and I don't know, have a bubble contest with my kiddo, right? Something that gives you some of the same stuff might be helpful in terms of you'll transition a little bit faster. Now, if you're like, "Oh, instead, I wanna go and I want to, I don't know, maybe folding laundry is relaxing for you." It's not for me, but for some people it is. So let's say you say, "Hey, I wanna go home and I really love the smell. It always calms me. I'm gonna spritz it in my bedroom and I'm gonna fold laundry while I listen to a podcast for 5 minutes." Right? That could be your end of the workday ritual too. Now, that might take you a little bit longer to put into place because it's dramatically different than walking into the kitchen and grabbing a glass or walking into the kitchen, opening up a cupboard and grabbing gum. So, the closer your ritual is to the previous behavior, the easier it's going to be for you to probably put it into place and establish it. It's not going to require as intense of a changing point, but it might be, like you said, it could be too close to what you were doing before that it may not be enough to actually interrupt the habit loop.
always say to people too, like, nothing is going to work as fast or as well as alcohol. So you're gonna have to kind of accept it. That it's like everything is gonna be like a little more work. And that's the point, right? Is that it's so easy to become addicted or have that habit of pouring the wine because it's consistent. It works every time. I don't remember a time it didn't really work.
Identity shifts are hard. Right? So I'm thinking about Victor Turner's work. He studied a lot around rituals, and there's like a separation, transition, and then an incorporation stage. And that separation stage can be so hard because not only are you separating yourself from the activity of drinking, but you're also separating yourself from probably the people that you drank with. You're separating yourself. There's like a period of time where you're sort of saying, I'm not who I was anymore. And there is some grief and loss there. And I think that if we're not always willing to accept that because we want to go, oh, I just want to, like that was bad. And we want to demonize it all. Right. But you're like, but there were things about that were serving you. That's why you did it. And you're going to have some grief and loss as you shift, even if it's shifting to something that's healthier, happier, better for you.
Yeah, that's such a great way to put it. And so, as we wrap up, if someone's listening and they feel off or flat, like you described, and they don't know where to start, what's like a very first step they can take?
One, I would encourage you. I have called a stuck assessment. I am a nerdy academic, so I took a whole lot of coaching transcripts and I coded 6 of the most common ways that people identify as being stuck. And this will help you identify how you are stuck, and then it will offer you a starting ritual to help you with your particular type of stuckness. Now, what I would say is, if you do this and you read this ritual and you're like, I don't like candles, right? Then shift it,
Yeah.
change it a little, but use that as inspiration or a start for your own ritual. And make it cozier, playful, or energizing. Like rituals don't have to be I lit a candle and had some incense, right? Like they can be simple and they can be you. And so but I would encourage you, it's plangoalplan.com/stuck. You can take this assessment. I still don't have like a computer or AI doesn't do it for me. So it might take me like 24 to 48 hours to respond to you. But like I would love to, look through your results and help you find a ritual that works best for you.
I love that so much. I'm going to do it right now.
Please do.
Be on the lookout.
I will.
Thank you so much for being here. I learned so much. I feel inspired to make some small changes. I think that for me the big takeaway was the ish. I loved the ish. That really works for me. So thank you so much and thank you all for listening to Sisters in Sobriety and we will see you next week.